When someone truly self-absorbed realizes you've completely checked out, something truly frightening unfolds. They don't just lose you, they lose the grip they assumed they'd forever have on you. This is their moment to deploy their ultimate maneuver, their final gambit, the one they firmly believe will pull you right back under their sway. But here's the unexpected turn. This time, it just doesn't work. If you've ever witnessed a narcissist play their last desperate tactic, share a simple yes in the comments, as your experience can illuminate this pattern for others long before you even utter the words, "I'm finished." A narcissist senses the finality of your withdrawal. This is because they constantly gauge your emotional state. They pick up on the quiet spaces in your replies, the disappearance of tenderness in your voice, the absence of your old excuses, and the shift in your energy that no longer funnels into fixing, comforting, or comprehending them. They perceive it instinctively, almost like a sudden lack of air. These individuals don't rely on spoken words to detect distance. They rely on the shutting off of emotional access. Your pulling away is far more threatening to them than any confrontation you could ever initiate. They don't need you to make a dramatic exit. They simply need to feel that your emotional investment is no longer guaranteed. This dynamic exists because their feeling of security is rooted in control, not genuine connection. They are perpetually scanning their emotional surroundings to ensure that power remains firmly in their hands. The moment your reactions stop fueling them, when your disappointment quiets, when the fear of losing them vanishes from your gaze, they immediately register the threat. They understand that the relationship's balance is no longer tipping in their favor. This shift doesn't feel like a simple breakup. It feels like the collapse of a system they believed they owned. The narcissist relies on your emotional involvement as proof of their own significance. So when you stop explaining yourself, stop seeking clarity, and stop fighting for the relationship, they feel irrelevant in a way they absolutely cannot tolerate. This is precisely why they react with such intensity when they sense the end nearing. They experience the loss of control, the slipping away of power, and the disappearance of the emotional sustenance they once depended on. It's not sorrow over losing you as a person, it's sheer panic over losing the crucial role you played. Narcissists interpret your emotional detachment as a direct assault on their ego. Their thought isn't, "I'm losing a valuable individual." Instead, it's, "I'm losing someone who makes me feel valuable." That fundamental difference is at the core of why they become so reactive when they sense you withdrawing. They recognize that something is concluding, not the relationship itself, but their previous capacity to influence your emotional world. A narcissist's ultimate move is never random. It is meticulously calculated, selected from a vast mental archive of what previously worked on you. They do not experiment with novel approaches. They meticulously repeat the exact patterns that once drew you back, softened you, bewildered you, or kept you emotionally tethered. They know your emotional history with them, like a well-rehearsed script. And when they sense you slipping from their grasp, they reach for the line that historically evoked the strongest reaction. This is why their final maneuver feels eerily familiar. You've witnessed it before, merely wrapped in greater urgency and more theatrical emotional display. If guilt was effective on you, they will suddenly transform into the injured victim, emphasizing how much they require you, or how your absence is causing them pain. If pity was your weak spot, they will recount a tragic story from their past or assert they are crumbling without you. If you once responded to charm or nostalgia, they will resurrect the captivating version of themselves you encountered initially, feigning rediscovery of affection, attentiveness, and understanding. And if fear or intimidation previously silenced you, they will escalate, shifting to anger, coldness, or erratic behavior to shock you back into the emotional turmoil they know you despise. The specific tactic they choose is intentionally customized to the emotional vulnerability you once possessed. They remember which excuse lowered your defenses, which apology broke your resolve, and which "I promise I'll change" kept you longer than you desired. The final card is precisely crafted around the emotional wound they believe still holds sway over you. They do not approach you with sincerity or a desire for personal growth. They approach you with a calculated strategy. What makes this moment so revealing is that they are not attempting to genuinely reconnect. They are striving to re-establish dominance. Their urgency is not driven by love, it is driven by panic. They are terrified of losing their ability to mold your feelings, your reactions, your choices. Their last resort is always about recapturing your emotional participation, because without it, they possess no power. They hope the familiar maneuver will trigger the old version of you, the one who cared too much, forgave too easily, or believed in their potential more than their actual conduct. When that fails to occur, when you no longer react as you once did, their final move utterly collapses. They realize you have outgrown the hook they relied on, and that fundamental shift is something they were utterly unprepared for. A narcissist intensifies their efforts when they feel the relationship dynamic crumbling, because control, not genuine connection, is the fundamental operating principle for them. They are emotionally wired to maintain superiority, influence, and psychological leverage. Therefore, the instant they sense that slipping, they react with extreme intensity. This escalation is not accidental, it is a primal survival response. To them, losing control is equivalent to losing their identity, stability, and emotional sustenance. When you begin to disengage, when you cease reacting, when you stop being emotionally available, they feel the very ground beneath them shifting. It's not your physical absence they dread, it's the loss of their power over you. This shift triggers a profound insecurity that they dedicate their entire lives to avoiding. Narcissists survive by meticulously managing impressions, manipulating emotional environments, and keeping people confined to predictable roles. When you no longer fulfill the role they assigned you, be it caregiver, peacemaker, audience, or emotional sponge, they panic. Their escalation is a forceful attempt to reset the dynamic. They may become more affectionate, more apologetic, or more charming than ever before, or they may abruptly swing to anger, accusations, hostility, or intense emotional volatility. They might shower you with affection one moment and sharply criticize you the next. This inconsistency is strategically designed to destabilize you, coaxing you back into the familiar, chaotic dance. What makes this escalation so bewildering is that it mimics an intensity that feels like passion, heartbreak, or profound desperation. However, beneath the surface lies a deep fear of losing a resource, not a genuine fear of losing a relationship. Narcissists do not process the conclusion of a connection with sadness or introspection. They process it through a cold threat analysis. They ask themselves, how do I compel this person to return? Not, why did this person feel hurt? They escalate because the breakdown of the power dynamic exposes a truth they simply cannot bear, that someone they believed they controlled has ultimately surpassed their influence. This is why their behavior becomes exaggerated, dramatic, or frantic. At this juncture, they are frantically attempting to restore a structure that exclusively benefits them. They cannot tolerate the notion of no longer being important, no longer being prioritized, or no longer being the emotional focal point in someone's life. Escalation is their final, desperate bid to pull the strings as forcibly as possible, hoping one of their tactics will work before you fully disengage. When a narcissist recognizes you are emotionally withdrawing, they often stage a performance of profound transformation that appears convincing on the surface, yet completely lacks true depth. This is the precise moment they suddenly mirror everything you once pleaded for, everything you hoped they would grasp, and everything they adamantly refused to provide when you were still emotionally invested. They become attentive, thoughtful, self-aware, and reflective in a way that feels almost unnatural. This is not genuine change. It is a calculated reaction to the realization of losing the control they presumed they would always possess. They meticulously study the version of themselves you desired and temporarily embody it, not because they have grown, but because they sense their grip loosening. This abrupt shift occurs because your detachment disrupts the very dynamic they depended on. When you cease arguing, stop seeking clarity, and stop craving reassurance, you remove the emotional fuel they utilize to keep you ensnared. Narcissists are not driven by internal accountability or true emotional insight, thus they do not evolve for their own personal development. They change as a mere tactic to regain access to your feelings. If you consistently wish they would communicate more effectively, they will suddenly engage in open dialogue. If you desired consistency, they will temporarily act consistent. If you longed for empathy, they will deliver lines that sound empathetic. They are offering you a reflection, not a genuine transformation. This behavior is inherently short-lived because it demands an emotional labor they cannot sustain. They cannot perpetually pretend to be the person you once wished they were, but they will maintain the facade long enough to attempt to pull you back into the cyclical pattern. Their sudden self-awareness frequently manifests in phrases such as, "I've been contemplating extensively and I now realize what I did," or "I finally grasp your needs." Even though these realizations conspicuously emerge only after your withdrawal, they are not experiencing genuine breakthroughs. They are desperately trying to halt your departure. What renders this phase so perilous is that it directly targets your deepest emotional cravings. It feels like a pivotal breakthrough, like the moment everything might finally transform. But what you are witnessing is manipulation skillfully disguised as personal growth. Once they detect you reconnecting or softening, the elaborate performance fades and the old patterns resurface because they were never genuinely replaced. They only reemerge to prevent your exit. A narcissist meticulously examines your emotional weaknesses with a level of precision that can feel profoundly unsettling once you finally step back and recognize the pattern. They carefully observe what softens you, what instills fear, what brings you comfort, and what causes you to doubt yourself. They pinpoint which past wounds shape your reactions, which insecurities compel you to over-explain, which hopes cause you to remain longer than you should, and which fears keep you emotionally attached. They diligently collect this information over time, not to genuinely understand you, but to exploit you. And when they sense you are finally done, they deploy the one vulnerability they believe still holds power over you. This is precisely why their final attempt feels so deeply personal. They do not approach you with a random strategy. They confront you with the exact emotional pressure point that once kept you bound. If you carried abandonment wounds, they will utter phrases that trigger your fear of leaving someone behind. If you struggled with guilt, they will imply you are harming them or being unjust. If your weakness was a need for reassurance, they will promise the future they previously refused to grant you. If you once felt responsible for fixing others, they will portray themselves as broken, lost, or misunderstood. They intimately know your emotional blueprint and they weaponize it. But the inherent paradox is that the moment you are truly finished, the moment you have healed sufficiently not to succumb to the old patterns, they detect a profound shift. They realize that the tactic that once worked no longer ensnares you. And that realization absolutely terrifies them. Your healing directly threatens their entire power dynamic. Narcissists thrive on keeping old wounds open because those wounds create crucial opportunities for manipulation. When you finally close those emotional doors, their influence irrevocably fades. This is why their last card is so desperate and so meticulously targeted. They are not fighting for the relationship itself. They are fighting for their ongoing access to your emotional compliance. Your personal growth dismantles their strategy, your established boundaries disrupt their control, and your burgeoning self-awareness demolishes the blueprint they had so carefully constructed. They observe you transforming into someone they can no longer control. And that, fundamentally, is what breaks them. Not the loss of you, but the loss of their ability to exploit the part of you they once relied upon. When a narcissist truly comprehends you are completely finished, their panic doesn't manifest in the dramatic way you might anticipate. Externally, they often project an image of composure, indifference, or even pride, behaving as if your departure means absolutely nothing to them. They may appear perfectly collected, posting cheerful photos, feigning quick recovery, or acting emotionally untouched. However, beneath that polished exterior lies a frantic, hidden struggle they desperately want to conceal. Their inner world spirals into chaos because they are confronted with a loss of control they were utterly unprepared for. They do not panic because they love you. They panic because they are losing the psychological power around which they constructed their entire identity. This internal collapse occurs because narcissists rely on external emotional supply to regulate their fragile self-esteem. When you withdraw that supply, your attention, reactions, concern, affection, or even your frustration, they are forced to face an emptiness they have spent their entire lives desperately avoiding. That emptiness feels akin to emotional starvation. They feel irrelevant, unseen, powerless. Yet, instead of acknowledging these profound feelings, they conceal them beneath a veneer of superiority or feigned indifference. They convince themselves they can easily replace you, that you were the problem, that they are better off, all while emotionally scrambling behind closed doors. Their panic is silent but intensely profound. They may obsess over why you left, clandestinely monitor your social media, question mutual acquaintances about you, reanalyze past conversations, or search for any indications that you are still affected. This desperation is entirely internal because displaying vulnerability would expose the very weakness they cannot tolerate. They cannot allow you or anyone to know that losing you profoundly shook them. Outwardly, they might act as if they have already upgraded, or as if your absence barely registered. Inwardly, however, they are wrestling with the terror of losing someone they believed they emotionally owned. This stark disparity between their external facade and internal turmoil is why their behavior becomes so unpredictable. One moment they appear completely detached, and the next they send a subtle message, a nostalgic reminder or a guilt-laden comment, to test if they still retain any access to you. Their outward calmness is an illusion meticulously crafted to protect their fragile ego. The undeniable truth is that your emotional detachment fundamentally destabilized them in a way they can never admit, and the silent panic they experience is irrefutable proof that your newfound strength has altered the dynamic forever. A narcissist's final maneuver is never rooted in genuine love, personal growth, or authentic emotional comprehension. It is entirely driven by the profound need to maintain control. When they perceive you are truly finished, their ultimate move is meticulously designed to appear caring, but beneath the surface, it is merely a desperate attempt to regain influence over your emotions. They do not return because they have reflected or genuinely changed. They return because they feel their power irrevocably dissolving. This is precisely why their final attempt feels dramatic, profoundly emotional, or unusually intense. It is not love expanding, it is control collapsing. Narcissists inherently understand that genuine connection does not motivate them in the same way it motivates others. They crave admiration, unquestioning compliance, and unfettered emotional access. So, when they endeavor to draw you back, they achieve this through elaborate emotional theatrics that cunningly mimic love, but utterly lack its true substance. They might articulate everything you desired to hear months or even years ago because they are acutely, aware that the right words can sow confusion. They might lavish you with compliments, intense attention, or feigned tenderness, hoping the sudden, stark contrast from their typical behavior will overwhelm your logical defenses. They may even speak expansively about the future, making grandiose promises they possess no genuine intention of fulfilling, simply because it keeps you emotionally engaged for a crucial moment longer. However, the more closely you scrutinize their actions, the clearer the underlying pattern becomes. Their final move never incorporates genuine accountability, consistent change, or a sincere willingness to understand your pain. It does not involve slowly rebuilding trust or respectfully honoring your boundaries. Instead, it revolves entirely around quick emotional strikes, shock, guilt, nostalgia, fear, and flattery. They meticulously select whatever emotion will elicit the strongest reaction from you, because the ultimate goal is not genuine reconnection. The ultimate goal is the rekindling of their control. This precise moment can emerge as one of the most profoundly empowering turning points for you, when you definitively recognize that their final maneuver is not an expression of love, but rather a calculated manipulation artfully disguised as affection. Something fundamental begins to shift deep within you. You cease responding emotionally. You stop believing the elaborate performance. You begin to perceive what was always there, lurking behind the curtain. And that powerful realization shatters the spell they so meticulously cast. The instant you detach from that illusion is the moment their last card loses all its power. Because control absolutely cannot survive clarity, and manipulation utterly cannot survive a person who no longer craves the emotional validation they once desperately sought. A narcissist simply cannot withstand silence, firm boundaries, or emotional detachment, because those are precisely the elements that strip away the power they so desperately depend on. When you become quiet, when you cease explaining, when you stop defending yourself, and when you stop reacting, you effectively cut off their access to your emotional world. That access is their vital lifeline. It is how they gauge their own worth and how they control the relationship's dynamic. Your silence transforms into a language they cannot manipulate. Your boundaries become impenetrable walls they cannot scale. And your emotional neutrality becomes a mirror, starkly reflecting their own powerlessness back at them. This is why they interpret your calm withdrawal as a direct form of attack. It's not that you are actively harming them, it's that you are no longer allowing them to influence you. What truly destabilizes them is that boundaries force them to confront themselves. Narcissists dedicate their lives to constructing elaborate illusions to evade accountability, shame, or any form of vulnerability. When you uphold firm boundaries, you are silently communicating, "I see the truth of who you are." That truth is utterly unbearable for them. They rely on people bending, forgiving, doubting themselves, or craving connection sufficiently to remain. When you no longer provide that, you dismantle the very dynamic that enabled their damaging behavior to thrive. They cannot maintain control over someone who refuses to react. They cannot manipulate someone who doesn't internalize their deceptive words. They cannot dominate someone who finally chooses their own profound peace. Your silence is not passive. It is an active, decisive breaking of the destructive cycle. It unequivocally signals to the narcissist that the version of you who tolerated emotional chaos no longer exists. And once that occurs, they are left with absolutely no viable strategy. Nothing they throw at you, guilt trips, pity plays, nostalgic appeals, blame, sudden bursts of affection, works anymore, because you are no longer responding from the same emotional place. The hooks they relied on have been permanently removed. The emotional door they used to walk through is now firmly closed. This is precisely why your boundaries become their ultimate checkmate. You are not actively fighting them. You are simply unavailable to be controlled. You are not attempting to change them. You are choosing yourself Their last card fails, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because you finally stepped into unshakable clarity. When you cease participating, you fundamentally break the invisible contract that kept the cycle in perpetual motion. And in that pivotal moment, they lose the one thing they were never willing to admit they so desperately needed: your emotional obedience.